Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Guidance Show. This is TV Media One, and we have our special guests, Mr. O'Mara and Mr. Williamson.
Hello, Alex.
And I'm joined here by my two co-hosts.
I'm Audrey. I'm Ava.
And we have a great show for you here today. We'll get right down to it with our first question. What piece or pieces of advice would you give to students as they begin to make college searches?
I feel like as students are starting, get out there. I think we are lucky in that we are located in a place where within an hour or two, there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of colleges. I think a lot of folks, you hear the same names, right? So you may grow up kind of hearing about this college or that college, but until you're actually on a college campus, it's hard to get a sense of what you're looking for. Do you want a big school or a small school? Do you want to be in the city or a more rural environment? Do you want to be in New England or New Mexico or somewhere in between, And I feel like it really helps to get on a campus and walk around. So, take a few tours before you really start narrowing down to what do I want my list to be? Because you can look at a big school and a small school, or a school in the city, a school in a more rural environment, really easily, just within a half-hour drive. So my first piece of advice would be just get yourself out there and see what there is to see.
Yeah. I also think that the summer going into senior year is a good time to really kind of knock out a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff. And what I always say to my juniors is 2 hours in the summer is a lot easier to come around than 2 hours in the spring of in the fall, of your senior year. When you think about all the classes that you have and all of the homework and then the activities, in that summer, it's a lot more attainable to chunk out 2 hours here, 2 hours there. So the more that you can prepare yourself before the start of senior year, the less stress that goes into those few months of the fall.
Speaking of changes, just with colleges, have you noticed any changes around the school or with students coming back from COVID?
Yeah, I think the start of the school year was definitely an adjustment. We were used to a much different schedule last year that took a little bit of adjustment to get into last year. So now it's same transitions back from kind of 4 longer periods in a day to 6 periods and a shorter lunch. With that break being a little bit shorter too. So I think the biggest change is just having students be able to adjust back to what it's like to have 6 periods of homework due the following day as opposed to 2, or how you spread out your homework on those Wednesdays that we had last year. And really just getting back into the flow of what a quote unquote traditional school year looks like.
Yeah, I think I would say the same thing. I feel like the big change was that I feel like we kind of went 0 to 60 or 0 to 100 really fast. And I think that applies both to students and teachers. I think it's been a really challenging year. I feel like we knew 2 summers ago that last year was going to be weird, right? Everyone expected that. I don't know if we expected this year to be what it is. I think that we were thinking, kind of back to normal, that's great, exciting, plus masks, but mostly back to normal. And it's been challenging, at least for me. I'll speak for myself. This has been a really, really exhausting year. And I think it's because we sort of ramped up really quickly. And I don't know how to do it a different way. I don't know how we could have done it differently, but that has been really hard, I think, for a lot of people. So I feel like we've seen a lot more, challenges, and a lot of students and teachers who are finding it to be a really tiring time. And I do think that it's a transition. I think that we will get there, but I think it's taken a little longer than at least I expected.
Speaking of changes in the schedule, how have the school start time change shown any disadvantages or advantages within the school?
I would say it's kind of tough to tell. I feel like there's been so much upheaval in the past couple of years that it's hard to tease out what might be a start time difference and what might not be. I will say that I personally feel more awake in the morning, which I think is good. I definitely have liked getting up and driving to school with it being a little bit lighter in the mornings. That's sort of my own self. The afternoons are a little trickier. I think getting to the things that I might want to do after, whether it's, going to the gym or, getting dinner with some friends or something, there's less time, for me personally. And I would imagine that that's very true for students who are trying to get homework done before they have the sport or a play or whatever they're going to. But I will say that I do appreciate sort of feeling a little bit less tired at certain times during the day than I think that I did. And again, it's tough to tell like what's due to the start time change and what's not, but it does feel like a lot of the concerns that I had about the changes weren't as sort of warranted maybe as they could have been.
Yeah. I think I've heard from students on both sides saying that some kids like it, some kids wish that we were still starting earlier. So I do think it's going to take a little bit of time before we can figure out if it was the right move. Yeah.
Well, if we move on to a little easier question, what's your favorite thing about being a guidance counselor at DS? Wow, that went far.
Honestly, I think my favorite part is if we take out kind of the chaos of last year and the start of this year. Prior to that, like we have a pretty sustainable caseload. So I work with about 170 students over the span of the 4 years. So it allows me to get to know a lot of them, much more than some of my counterparts at other schools who may have 350 students. I think that's probably my favorite part about being here at DS specifically, is that it provides me the opportunity to actually do the things of this job that I enjoy.
Yeah, I think that would be my answer absolutely as well. It's my favorite thing is definitely the students. To avoid repeating that, I also feel like we have a faculty and an administration that I really like working with. I think that we get along really well, and Mr. O'Meara and I are both in an administrative program, so we're meeting with other, teachers, counselors, folks from other school districts, and it really does feel like we have a special place to work where we do get along really well with our colleagues, and we get to know our colleagues really well because of the size of the school. I think that it allows us to make connections with teachers, and I do think also teachers tend to stick around at DS for a while, so those connections continue. Every year it's not like we have 20 new people to meet that we're going to be working with. Every year there may be one or two in the past few years. New teachers who come in and join the community, but there's not a ton of turnover, so it allows us to really make those relationships and honestly friendships, which I've appreciated too.
Yeah, well, it seems like you like kind of like where you're at with the size of the school and being able to form connections, but is there anything that you would change about the school if given the opportunity?
I feel like along with some of those good things about being a small school, having those tighter communities, one thing that is tough about it is it does become somewhat isolating. I think we talk about like the Dover-Sherburne bubble, and I don't know how to sort of change that per se, but I feel like I would love to have an opportunity for students to step outside the bubble a little bit more, whether that means just having a more diverse community in all senses of the word, or having some sort of relationship with other towns in a different way, that it's not so sort of like, I don't know, self-fulfilling, and it's not this one bubble that like everyone kind of sits in and doesn't really get out of. And I think that there is a big world out there.
Yes.
What I often find is that when seniors are ready to go off to college, like they are all so excited to go somewhere bigger and different. And I totally get that. And, I felt the same way when I was graduating high school also. And I think most seniors places do. But I wonder whether there are things that we could do to have it feel less isolating being here.
Much more simple answer. I wish lunch wasn't 21 minutes. Like I wish we had a couple more minutes to breathe. But that's also tricky because when you think about class time and minutes in the classroom and all those things that are really important and actually mandated by not just the community but the state. It makes the schedule like a delicate balance that we have to play every year. But sometimes it's a bummer watching kids like still like shoveling food into their mouth as they're like trying to get to class, and it didn't feel like a true break in the day. It just felt like a quick snack and then back to class type deal.
Yeah, especially with seniors. I feel like they encourage us to leave, and then they're just like 21 minutes.
Yeah.
So you can't really go anywhere. So
Right.
yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
It's
Like
not
you
much.
sit down and like you eat and then suddenly it's like time to go
Yeah.
back to class.
Exactly. By the time I sit down with all my food, like lunch is like done.
Yeah.
So
I think there's not much within a 20-minute drive of here, so it can be tough to
The isolating
go out.
aspect
Yeah.
of the DS.
exactly.
Did you work as a guidance counselor for any schools prior to DS, and how are they different or similar?
I did actually. I worked at a small school in Brighton, and whereas we talk about how DS is small, that school is actually smaller. So my first graduating class from a previous school was 41 students. So it was much different in terms of just how the school was run, and there wasn't necessarily 4 languages to choose from. There was one language that everyone did and stuff like that. So it's interesting. It's an interesting difference of we're still calling DS small, but when I first got here, I was like, oh my God, like there was 220 students at my previous school. So when I first got here, 680 felt like a lot.
Yeah, and I've not worked in an official capacity at any other high schools. I did do a year practicum, which is like an internship at Brookline High School, which is much bigger, right? So it's sort of the opposite side of things where, even the guidance counselors worked in like different areas of the high schools because they had like sort of like little cohorts. So students didn't necessarily get to know everybody in the school, but you had your sort of smaller group of students that you would get to know. And I think that there were, some benefits to that in that, students did have a greater group of students to get to know. You didn't necessarily know everything about everybody and hadn't been together since kindergarten. And at the same time, I think it was harder to get to know maybe the teachers because you were always sort of having different people. And I think there's a lot of folks here who have had maybe a teacher twice during their time, or at least see somebody in the hallway that like, oh, I had that teacher last year and I, remember them, and I'm just going to hang out with Mr. O'Hagan after class today, even though I didn't have him until I haven't had him for the past 2 years, right? So I think that there are some nice things about the connections that we can make in a smaller school that are really special. But again, some sort of like downsides to that too.
Yeah, well, coming back to the similar question to change, what's your least favorite thing about DS, or something we can improve on more as a community?
I think change is always really difficult for people. I think adults, students, families. So small changes take a lot of work. And I think for changes to be successful, you have to commit to the fact that you're going to get a lot of pushback after you make a change. So something as not simple because it was big, it's changing the start time.
Yeah.
A conversation around weighted versus unweighted GPAs. A conversation around should our grade 9 math classes be leveled at all. All of these different conversations, you have to move very slowly to kind of collaborate the conversation and make sure everyone's on board and make sure everyone's hearing that. So that's neither my least favorite nor something we could improve, but I do think it's something that is a good part of the conversation to say, like, this is something that's difficult. It's tough to make changes when people are so steadfast in the confidence in what's already happening.
And I think sort of for me, it would be, again, kind of conversations. I think that not just DS, but a lot of places, it's hard to have challenging conversations. And I wish that we were further along in our path towards, being able to talk about some of the more difficult things, both at DS, but in society, whether it's, equity, equality, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ issues, gender issues, all of these things are really important in the world. And I think that they are really challenging to talk about. And I wish that I do believe we'll get there, but I wish that we were sort of further along in our quest to have those challenging conversations and welcome those challenging conversations with our students. And it's not easy, but I feel like it's important. So that would be the thing that I would want to improve, is sort of more open conversations about challenging topics.
Yeah, kind of moving on like a lighter note. I know we talked about change and like favorites and least favorites, but like why did you personally decide to become a guidance counselor?
So I really like learning. I'm like a really huge nerd and I'm like super proud of it. And I went to college thinking that maybe I would want to be a teacher, and maybe like a history teacher was my thought. But by the time I graduated, I wasn't 100% sure whether it was going to be history or I wanted to go into some other sort of type of teaching. So I worked in college admissions for a few years after that. And that's kind of how I found guidance. When I was in high school, I had a guidance counselor, Mr. Panchuk. But I never thought of it as like something that I would want to be or like could be necessarily. And I sort of rediscovered it through working in college admissions. But the more that I learned about it, the more I realized it wasn't really college. It was more, working with students and sort of being there as they were celebrating stuff and helping them through tough times. And in admissions, I would read college essays. So you would read all of these stories of students, and these amazing things that they did, or these, tough times that they went through. And it was really hard just having it on paper, right? And not knowing the kid at all. And I wanted to be there, and I wanted to help, and I wanted to celebrate with them and all of that. And that was really kind of the first step. And the more I learned about it, the more excited I got about it. And I feel like this is like a constant refrain for me. And like I love my job. Like, it is exhausting.
Yeah.
But honestly, I wake up 99% of the days excited to come back. And that to me is like, I couldn't ask for more out of a job or a career. And I say that completely genuinely. Like, I love what I do. And I feel like it is sort of the students that really make it what it is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm a student.
So when I got to college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I still don't necessarily know if I fully know what I want to do, type deal. And I think that's okay. And I think that we hear a lot of pressure from parents, from ourselves, from everyone who has an opinion, which is everyone, that we have to know exactly what we want to do when we get to college. And going into college undeclared is a bad thing. I am so happy that I went into college undeclared, because I was able to take an economics class. So my older brother was an economics major. I was like, maybe I'll like that too. It was not for me. My mom is a nurse, so I was like, okay, let's take this health policy class and see if I like that. I liked half of it, and then I was like, oh, I can't see myself doing this. And so I used the first 2 years of college to really explore all these different types of programs, all these different types of majors. And it wasn't until spring of my sophomore year that I took a class called Controversies in American Education. And I took it kind of on a whim as an elective course that I had to take in the social sciences to graduate from the school that I went to. And it was fascinating. It was really interesting to just hear different perspectives of what schooling is for different people from different places. And it drew me down a path of inquiring and asking curious questions about education. I could never be a teacher. I would be terrible at it, and I had the self-awareness to know that. But there was something about education that was intriguing to me. And so I worked closely with my advisor in college, and he worked in research and education. So we basically had him 4 times after that one class over the course of the next 2 years, and discovered that it was the social aspect of college the social aspect of high school and education that was really interesting to me. And the idea that, like, as much as we're here to learn academics, like, watching a student in grade 9 versus when they graduate is a really cool experience, and reminds me every time that high school isn't just about what you're learning in class. High school is about having those difficult conversations. High school is about getting really frustrated and then trying to figure out how you can cope through that. High school is about learning how to plan an agenda. All these different things that happen outside of just what you're learning in these academic-based courses that I find so important, that kind of drew me towards what I'm doing now.
Very interesting. All right, so our last question is undoubtedly the most important one. What is your favorite part of the Thanksgiving meal?
As much as I'd love to say, like, family, it's not. Gravy. Gravy is my favorite part. It goes on everything. Makes everything better.
That is very true.
Wow, you took that a little deeper. I was thinking just straight up food.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I was gonna say the rolls. Like,
The rolls are good.
I'm big on the rolls. I think they're the forgotten aspect of the meal. But I will say that I'm not the most adventurous eater, and it's taken me a while to engage in the Thanksgiving meal. And I'll say I ruined Thanksgiving at far too old of an age. That age will remain unspoken, but I was considered an adult and refusing to eat the meal in front of me. And my dad, still to this day, will talk about this, where he was like, if you're not going to eat this, then you have to have like a microwaved hot dog. And like, I'm sorry if you like microwaved hot dogs, but there is nothing worse than eating a microwaved hot dog. And so he basically forced me, because I refused to eat anything on my plate. And then I didn't not get sick in the kitchen. And so at, again, far too old of an age, I was sent to my room as if I was 6 years old.
Are you still invited to
I
Thanksgiving?
am.
So it wasn't that bad.
Yeah. We had to work through that. Christmas
Yeah.
that year was a little tricky,
Yeah.
but we got through.
But the holidays heal all wounds.
Don't they?
Sometimes. But yeah. No, the rolls. It's the short answer.
Okay, thank you.
Well, folks, I think that's it. And ending on an exciting note, as I can for surely say, this was a great show. We'll hope to see you next time for the guidance show, whenever that may be. But for now, good night over Sherborne.